Guys, welcome to another episode of the Remember Who You Are show. Just so you know, this is a mini series within the actual show in which we are discussing Dr. David Hawkins's Map of Consciousness. He details this in his book, Power versus Force, and my guest is someone you are very, very well familiar with. You get to meet right after this intro and also enjoy our conversation. The prime directive for every human is to know thyself, which is not a discovery, it's a remembering. And that's the goal for this show, to help you remember who you are. I am your host, Roland Achenjang. Indeed, I am Roland, and with me today is my friend, mentor, the energy doctor, Randy Veitenheimer. Randy, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. It's interesting to get past that area where we're concentrating on in the previous talk, and to go through neutrality and end up at willingness is really kind of the most difficult passage people go through in life, and that's a willingness to move up in consciousness. And so I look forward to seeing what we can come up with on this one.
Yeah, no kidding.
So,
it's the point of no return, right? You can't go back from here. Yeah. This is the fourth episode that we're recording, and I just thought I'd remind folks why we're doing this, right? And I think the primary reason is you introduced me to Dr. David Hawkins's work, and I really liked it. You got to interact with him a little bit, and I thought it would be interesting to get a perspective from you about who he was, because someone like me never interacted with him. And the second thing was to shine a light on, this work where he introduced the different levels of consciousness and help us make sense of our lives by kind of gauging when we are experiencing ourselves or expressing ourselves from either one of these levels. It's fluid, of course. We're not always going to be in one. But then the whole point is, while you do this more and more, like the name of the show, you remember who you are in the process. And that's, just as a reminder with episode number 4, why we're having these discussions. And I think it's important, especially in today's, times when I guess life has always been this way. There's always been an opportunity for you to really forget who you are and experience what you might call suffering and pain. And this helps kind of mitigate that in a way.
Yeah. It's, I don't like the word or the prefix RE, right? But it's appropriate to say it's working to regain yourself or return. There's those RE words, right? Mm-hmm. Reset, reprogram, restart. There's all kinds of language out there. I look at it as like you set yourself towards being different is the easiest way. And then we'd say being different in a positive way. And then, so most people do only that. Going to 8 years of lectures with Dr. Hawkins showed that he wanted to understand the process. And so power versus force is very much about explaining the process of what happens kind of like in a person's lifetime. And the other part of it is that to give you a reference set, and I'm very big on talking about people have reference sets and preference sets and operational sets, organizational. It's part of my set theory thing I've been working on. And it's very simple. Your reference set is non-conscious. So it's like what colors you like and what foods and all this stuff that are around you. Set of information, you develop preferences. I like this color, I like this food, I like this emotion, I like this mental state. We don't ever really look at ourselves that way. And I think that Dr. Hawkins' background of the things he went through, and then utilizing psychiatry and psychology as ways to examine some of that, gave him insights that he wanted to share. And I think that's the same thing like you writing your book, or the talks I give and the stuff I do is very much about trying to gain some insight and understanding about how life goes on, right? How we
Yeah.
experience it. So,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and then this is a prelude that this date, December 10th, has been changed to October 23rd, a Sunday in Sedona, where I will be doing the talk on Power versus Force Revisited after 20-some years. So that's kind of like where we find ourselves. And these conversations I enjoy because I get to give a little more information and hopefully expand a little bit about what David talked about. So,
Yeah. And we enjoy having you.
yeah.
You know, we always go on a tangent, but I actually also like that because, the Remember Who You Are show, when you have conversations with me, it's really like having a conversation. There's no um, set topics
Right.
that we need to discuss, right? We may go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
And I feel like doing that now in particular because many times we've discussed how all of life is really a gateway into tapping into additional insight that could
Right.
help you make sense of your reality. And for Dr. David Hawkins, you can see that as a psychologist, he was able to use that to frame the work that he eventually created, which resulted in the map of consciousness,
Right.
right? And so for me, for example, in my book, when I write, I use a lot of my, programming as a pharmacist student and then eventually a pharmacist to make sense of the insight that I tapped into. And the connections were there for me. It was my language. And so I used it.
Exactly.
But I wanted to highlight that,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
the beauty of this
Everybody.
work.
One of the things I used to be a stockbroker. People find
What,
that bad thing.
what haven't you
Well,
done, Randy?
investment banking, stockbroker. And one of the things that was most curious about that, when I took all the tests and everything, first of all, when I was 18, I wanted to be a stockbroker. And I walked into an office, and not to mention names, Merrill Lynch, and and I had hair as long as I have now or longer. I was, bell-bottom pants, the whole routine, his hippie days, And this guy in a three-piece suit looked at me and said, I go, I want to be a stockbroker. And he said, you will never be a stockbroker. That's programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I came out of there. And then one day when I was about 30, I told my wife, she goes, what's wrong? And I said, I always wanted to be a stockbroker. She goes, well, go do it. So I went and took the test, failed, took the test again, passed with a 99% score or something. And I walked in the office and I sat down and they assigned me a partner here in California. And I go, how do you be a stockbroker? that question had never occurred to me, right? Anyway, I go, how do you be a stockbroker? And the guy turned around and looked at me and goes, just act like one, right? And I was like, wow, right? So I sat around and I watched them and they were reading papers and looking at screens, and I started doing the same thing. And finally, and I listened, and finally somebody goes, what do you think of so-and-so? And I go, oh, I think, it just all comes out. And it comes out in the language of stockbrokering, okay? And so I tell people, if you want to be a stockbroker, learn the language. If you want to be a doctor, learn the language. You want to be a truck driver, learn the language. Every skill set has a language to it, And so one of the great things about Power versus Force, I tell everybody I work on, they have to read that so we can have commonality of language. In other words, we're kind of speaking computer language, engineering, science, housewife, teacher. I can speak all those languages because I've been through a lot of that. And So when you look at the power versus force on the map of human consciousness, what you're looking at when you go sideways off any number, 200, you'll see the emotional language, you'll see the mental language, you'll see, 4 or 5 things that alert you to that language is being used in that state of consciousness. And boy, that's the key to it. Because if you can hear yourself speaking those things, I'm mad, right? I'm angry,
Mm-hmm.
I'm apathetic, I'm tired, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed. You're stating your level of consciousness to yourself. You don't need anybody to calibrate it. You just listen to yourself and how you talk. So,
Or the kind of country western music that you listen to,
oh
and
yeah, yeah.
what the
Well,
lyrics
and
saying.
that's what we were talking about earlier. Is that if you calibrate the level of interaction with your senses, and so that becomes interesting because I can hear music or language over 200 or under 200. And literally we were saying positive or negative or neutral at 200. And then
Mhm.
you say, well, I read things. And it's like, well, yeah, you can walk along the bookstore and calibrate and find books that are over 200. The problem with that, and same thing with food and, all your senses, there's over 200 and under 200. And the problem is that there's a lot of information in under 200 information sets. In other words, like under 200 music, there can be songs that have a deep spiritual message embedded in them. And that's what I tell people. You didn't have to go to a spiritual practice. You could have just listened to 60s rock and roll. You could have learned science fiction and found out the entire future for the past 50 years.
Yep.
So that type of information is embedded. And of course, the song I use is Simon and Garfunkel, words of a prophet are written on the subway walls, tenement halls. In other words, you don't know where you're going to find the information. And that comes at the next point is a lot of people want to demonize anybody that tells the truth. And so Dr. Hawkins, the yoga teachers I've had, martial arts teachers, and it's like, look, it has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the fact they put out some information that if you utilize it properly or any way, may improve your life to the point that you actually get to be alive again. You get to regain who you are, right? Or remember who.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, it can come from anywhere. It's just the organizational set that Dr. Hawkins presented in the form of map of consciousness is a useful tool. And it's useful. I've found application from 5-year-olds to 80-year-olds, from the struggling people in finance to billionaires. It's universally applicable. So that's why I'm fond of it. That's why I tell everybody to read it. So
Yeah, I appreciate that, right?
yeah.
And it's human nature to kill the people who are spreading information that challenges you. If you look at the story of Jesus Christ, they're like, wait, what the heck are you talking about with your kindness?
Yeah. How dare you be
Take
kind?
Yeah. So let's continue where we picked off with the last show. We ended up in 310, which is willingness, and we talked about that. So we're going to move right along with acceptance as the next level of consciousness that you can sort of express and experience life in, and this is level 350. This one's kind of unique too, right? We are already above 200, so it only moves up from here. But acceptance, Randy, what do you think about this level of consciousness?
Well, there was a song. Accept me for who I am. Don't make me over. I can't remember if it was Diana Ross and the Supremes or somebody. Somebody will correct me on that. And I always thought that it should be the theme song for the Hells Angels. So if you don't get that joke, please call me and I'll explain it. But the idea of acceptance is critical to two things. Number one, we tend to apply it to outside of ourselves, right? Acceptance, and in that song, it's accept me for who I am. That is not telling you, that is telling yourself. And so these conversations go internal at a certain point. So when we look at the under 200 level consciousness, those are external conversations. I'm mad never occurs to you to look at you being mad, right? I'm feeling this or that never occurs to you that, that's one of his books, I think is the other one. Anyway, so acceptance is literally a turning inward. It's a turning point to allow you to say, accept me for what I am. And now that, have as a reference set that chart and be able to say, well, I would rather today or tomorrow be more willing to be loving or to be more conscious in this way intellectually. And so again, each of these levels represents a lot going on. And it takes some time usually. It doesn't mean you can't transcend all of them. And that's another book he wrote, Transcending the Level of Consciousness. In other words, how much time you spend at each one is what I call indeterminate. There's too many factors involved, like who you're around, where you live, what you do. It's like what languages you speak. Acceptance is one where, again, there's a lot going on because you're turning internal now. And we call that being able to be self-adjusting. Okay. Before that, you may require outside help. Okay. But once you can turn inward, you can self-adjust yourself. So again, it becomes critical as you be able to not interact with the world, but interact with yourself and see what you can do. And of course, this applies to the internal martial arts I teach. Okay. So.
Yeah. No, Randy, and to add to what you said about acceptance, I'm looking at my notes here. This is something I play with very regularly in deep meditation. Usually in that time, right, emotional trauma or events that happen in my life that I need to sort of resolve will come up while I'm meditating. And I find that acceptance is one way to resolve that really quickly, where you take the ownership that, okay, if this did make me upset, what was my role in it is usually how I ask it. And then the other piece, this is a lot of years of meditating, but is having the awareness that being upset is not necessarily a bad thing. It's an experience that you can have, and so it's teaching you something.
Sure.
And what I've written here is at this point you begin to see yourself as the source in a way, or the creator of the life that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And so you it's kind of weird to describe it, but like when I'm meditating and the thoughts or the emotions come, you can see it. You can see your first emotional response to be maybe something that's embedded in you as a trained unconscious response, and then stop and catch it. When I've been able to resolve, there's a spontaneous smile that comes up on my face. And it's kind of neat. And then you actually do feel a shift in your energy. Like there's a shift within your being. So there's that piece. And the other cool thing is emotionally calm. And you have a larger perspective here in life, right? There's just not one way to, you become socially not constricted. You're able to see multiple points of views in a way when you accept that, oh, I need somebody to tell me that my C2 Keep application is crap and they don't need it.
Right.
And then you don't overreact, like, let me tell you, or they call and say, hey, guess what? We have to move your dates from December to October, they say, is this why you're doing it? And then you can almost put yourself in your shoes
Right.
and say, I get it,
Yeah.
and that's fine. We'll
Yeah.
move on, right? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things you're talking about too is to go out of judgment. Okay. So acceptance involves prejudgment. You've already stated that you need to accept something, right? Meaning you've already decided that it in some ways a negative that you have to resolve to come back to neutral. And one of the things I teach, and I used to argue about all talk therapies, just to get us in more trouble, is that they don't resolve anything because the human mind is incapable of resolving anything, right? But it's very capable at coming to neutrality, kind of like a non-resolved state, but not a state where you need to resolve something. It's sort of a convolution. So if you go out of judgment, and there's really no reason to accept anything. And one of the language I really, I'm not supposed to hate anything, but
yeah, well, there you go with your judgment, Randy.
But it is what it is. Just makes me crazy because it isn't what it is. It is what it is because of the way you're looking at it or experiencing it. And that's the only way it is what it is, because it isn't. If somebody can sit there and wrestle with that one for a while.
Yeah.
But once you go out of judgment, then there's no reason to accept or reject. It's cold outside. It's like that's an observation, but it can be said with a rejection or with an acceptance or with an embracement. So those are kind of like your three choices that are going along there, when you're involved in it. And it becomes a pretty interesting thing to play with. Once you go into a state of not being judgmental, acceptance is more or less automatic. And what that does is it doesn't alert your autonomous, semi-autonomous nervous systems or your glandular system to go crazy, right? And all the energy that's pent up in making that choice dissipates and goes back in the system, makes it available for the next encounter. And so that's kind of the way I look at that level.
Yeah. That's a big point, Randy, in that when your system does not react, the energy that you otherwise would use to react to something that you are finding difficulty in accepting is kind of reserved for something else.
Yes.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Just to give you an example, like, why would you do all this? Why would you study this? I started doing that first lecture in 2000, 2001, whenever. And let's say I was normal. Never really been normal, but we'll start there. And since that time, my girlfriend said one day, I think in the last year or two, I got mad. And she looked at me and she goes, I've known you for 20 something years, and that's only the second time I've ever seen you get mad. Right? Because anger is pretty useless. Right? Now, at one level. Now, if you're down in apathy, anger becomes very useful to move you up and out of apathy. So now the relationship of all these levels of consciousness now becomes very informative for understanding who you are and becoming who you are and returning to who you are and trying to figure out the way all these things work.
Yeah.
So there is a benefit. As you move away from each level of consciousness, you tend to have an aversion to it. Like I have an aversion to getting angry, right? And then I have an attraction to being loving. Playful is not on that scale, but that's something that I really enjoy more than anything. And so,
and being comical.
Yeah.
And I do want to add one last thing, especially with folks who are listening to this and then are second guessing themselves about the ability to operate from this level of consciousness. just to remind them that if they really take the time to look at their life and all the experiences they've had, there's so many instances where they have displayed this level of acceptance.
Yes.
Where they have, yeah, right. And so you can use that as a springboard, like you said, as a set or a benchmark, in order to shift your awareness and perception to different things where you might be struggling to accept, right? Like, why was I able to accept, so and so as no longer something that can evoke an emotional reaction for me? Like, what happened? And use that to
Yeah, exactly.
move forward.
One of the examples of acceptance is, I tell bad jokes. People should get over it. You come home one day and somebody broke in and stole everything in the apartment, and I asked people, what would your reaction be? And you can go on the map of consciousness and find their reaction, right? And people are like, I'd be so mad and I'd call the police and blah 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 blah, right? And I go, this is my reaction. Remember, they stole everything in the apartment. Wow, that couch I was looking at will fit exactly there, and I didn't know that. You see what?
Yeah, yeah.
The flip in consciousness.
The flip.
Yeah, and that is truly what happens. You kind of flip forward, we say, or flip backwards, and that's why, to me, in the map of consciousness, there's mobility. There's mobility as you move in and up and around these things. It doesn't mean that anger's gone forever. It was available a couple of times last few years. But you tend to lose interest in those. It's kind of like you'd be around people that are mad all the time. At some point, you get tired of listening to them. Just listen to the news or some of these commentators. It's like all they can tell you is what I call Monty Python, harumph, 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 or there was some other.
Is that Peanut?
Yeah, like I didn't get a harumph there from that person, but that's all they want you to do. They want you to tell you, oh my God, this is so bad out there, and this person did that, and you need to harumph, 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 harumph. It's like, no, I don't want to. Now they're mad at you because you're not as mad as they are. And so each level of consciousness wants participation, and that becomes very interesting then, right? So, wrestle that one for a while.
That should be a song, right?
Yeah.
These levels of consciousness, they just want to be loved.
Yeah, that's it. So.
Okay. Yeah, let's move on from acceptance. I really like this level of
I do too.
Consciousness. Yeah, to 400. It gets interesting here. This is reason.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because to me, reason has to do a lot with logic.
Yes.
And from a spiritual standpoint, I'm like, logic will always fail you and severely limit you spiritually. That's really how I feel, right?
I think about that. Right. Star Trek, with Data and with Spock and stuff. It's and then we'll bring it into modern terms, and then it's called AI, right? AI is a logic system, okay? And so now we'll translate one more time. To be rational in an irrational world is irrational. But logic gives us a framework. And I tell people, one of the great things I ever did, I went to a logic course in college. And then I went to an advanced logic course. And I got to tell you, it is almost impossible to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't follow logic, right? Because, and I've explained that before about how it devolves into the emotions. So ration and reason will rapidly devolve into an emotional state because people want to be right. We're back to that again, right? Yeah. So to be right is a logical outcome, but it also can be irrational. So again, convolutions in language, but that level of it's I can think, therefore I am. Okay. In Latin, and under 200 would say doleo ergo sum. I hurt, therefore I am. So under 200 is very much a state of being in pain or hurting. When you get up to the intellect, you're pretty well ignoring the body, and you're ignoring the physical world. Okay. It all becomes irrational and therefore becomes divorced from reality. But it doesn't mean it's not intertwined. In other words, that there's some utility to using logic. And I love it. But one of the great things in that second course was the concept of symbolic logic. And I think we are greatly undereducated in that. As an example, they did a symbolic analysis, symbolic logic analysis of a speech given by a certain politician. And after 30 minutes of putting positive and negatives to every word, they came out with 0. Literally, in the 30-minute conversation, they hadn't said anything. So I hope in our conversations, we end up saying something that equates to a positive number, right? Because sometimes you can talk to people for 30 minutes and go, what the heck is that? Right? So I'm a great admirer of logic. And fiction, basically, if you write science fiction, is you write from a logical perspective until the logic falls apart. And if you want to know what war is war carried out to irrationality. Is logic
Absolutely.
carried out to irrationality. So
and so let me ask you this about logic, just to get your thoughts. Right, if you think about employing something like kinesiology, or at least the way you employ kinesiology, and you're seeking for truth, and you go, okay, what's going on here, and you get a response. Many times, if you use logic, there will be a disagreement between what you get and what you should do. So I always think of, right, that your emotions are, if you listen to them keenly, they're going to tell you what you should do. But logic many times will say, nah, I shouldn't do it. And then when you start sort of playing with logic, you can, confirmation bias comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
Where you could look at manipulate the data to say logically this makes sense because this is the data that I have, and blah blah blah. And so that's my own. That's why I say it's a high level of thinking, but it's
okay.
It will.
People say I tell bad jokes, and then one time in a lecture, somebody goes, "You must really hate marriage," and I go, "No, I tried it twice." So, another bad joke. And then, but here's the thing: marriage is devoid of logic. I mean, just you can run through it every which way you want, but and for people before they get too upset, is logic is inappropriate to marriage. Okay, so so that becomes an interesting conversation, because a lot of what we do doesn't require logic. It's only utilized afterwards, right? And if you utilize logic, you wouldn't necessarily engage in a lot of human activity. So, right? I mean, you could logically and rationally plan out the exact number of calories and this, that, and the other. Like, it's very simple: the amount you take in, the amount you expend in a day, right? Anything that works to have you expend more, you lose weight. I mean, so all these diets and stuff basically don't work. They only work on what we would call logically, right? And of course, they all skip the logic of it, right? Otherwise, it'd be my one-page book on losing weight. Take in less than you spend. So that becomes the true of savings. It becomes, there's a lot of things that go into that. And and like I said, logic and ration aren't necessary, because life is not necessarily logical. Remember, it's irrational. And that becomes something that acceptance comes into. If you can accept the fact that things happen that you have no control of, you have no interest in, that you don't know where the hell they came from, hell being a place of the imagination. But it's like, okay, I still need to go on and be Roland. I still need to go on and be Randy. I still need to go on as best I can. So ration, reason, logic, all those things, I love them, and they're great to apply to people to force them into compliance with what with your state of mind, and that be
there you
right.
go.
And so,
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So this was one I found very interesting, that it was pretty high on the consciousness level, and I get it, especially if you're looking at large, complex amounts of data and you're trying to extract from it maybe a trend that could support a decision. But you always say, like with the weather folks, right? It's 99% chance of rain. Logically, we should do this as a business because, you know, like it works there. And then even in healthcare, where I see reason being challenged all the time. You come in as a patient, we say this is the best way to treat you, but it doesn't work, right? You got the placebo effect. That's part of it. And then you also have anomalies where people they go see Randy and they're healed, they meditate, and I am one person who I tell you this story. After going through Lasik surgery, I suffered from dry eyes for over a year plus, which is a classic symptom post Lasik surgery. And I used every over-the-counter wetting agent for the eyes, you know, ointments plus drops plus solutions at night, during the day, multiple times. And then there was a period in the summer of 2016 while I was meditating, and this was in Sydney, Montana. And during that time, for about a month, every time I would do it, my eyes would get really hot, and it would feel as though somebody was putting pepper spray in them, or somebody was taking a needle and just pricking. And it would hurt and hurt, but it was also so joyful. And that sounds really freaky, but it's true. It was a controlled pain, because this was in deep states of meditation. And then one day, while I was doing this, I reached sort of a climax, opened my eyes when I was done, and they were all wet. Like the dry eyes was healed, just like that. And so if I use reason to try to explain that to my colleagues, they're going to say, what are you smoking? You need to stop, right? Yeah. But it was my personal experience. And so, I mean, reason is great. I like it. It's high level.
I tell people, use logic and reason, use Western medicine, whatever, but also know when it doesn't work. Well, now you're into, say, the area I work in, right? Which is everything else besides Western medicine. But
it's psychology.
Yeah, it's one of the things that, like in martial arts, I teach martial arts, 10 Sons martial arts. One of the things is called the Moonlit path, okay? And it's what we call our seeing in darkness exercises. The ability to move in dark, see in darkness. It's a specific set of exercises. And the Moonlit path is to be able to close your eyes and follow the information, or to go looking for the information that you need to help yourself. And that occurs in a more or less meditative state. And boy, I don't know anybody teaches that anymore. I've taught it to my special forces and other people because you're able to move forward in environments you otherwise wouldn't have knowledge of. And so we can look at it the same way when we look at trying to involve ourselves in what I call knowledge of disciplines, medicine, spirituality. They all have their languages back to then. How do you move through it? It's like you could stack spiritual books 8 foot deep all the way around the planet. And you still, through your own consciousness, have to find some way to move forward. And I think that operating program of you being you, which is, you talk about it in your book, and I talk about it when I reset people. And people say, what do? I reset a person to be themselves. That's it. If you can do that, then you have a greater chance of wandering through life in a way that is beneficial to you. That's the one way to look at it. So Moonlit
Yeah.
Path is being able to engage in information that you otherwise have no knowledge of, but are still able to determine a path forward, to know what you need to know or learn what you need to learn. So, yeah.
You know, when we have these talks, I always get insights about things I should try. And in listening to you talking about the Moonlit pad, I thought, I'm going to go blindfold
Yeah.
myself and walk around the house, try to avoid the walls.
I've been asked, like, what are you doing in the middle of the night? Well, I'm walking around, right? It's pitch black. Yeah, I'm still walking around. And I have these sensors called little toes, big toes, walls, doors,
Yeah.
and they're going to teach me something. That is the proper way to learn feng shui. Also, by the way, what you do, you start being able to sense the presence,
flow of energy.
The flow of energy. People talk, I don't believe in flow of energy. Well, close your eyes and hang out for a while, you'll find out, right?
I totally. I mean, I just have to remember to also put my daughter's toys up while we're stepping all over.
Yeah.
So that's reason. I mean, we need it on this planet. By the way, I with everything I'm saying, you cannot operate on planet Earth without reason, even if.
Right.
And I'm biased here, I'm speaking from my experience. Even if you have a full-blown spiritual awakening, I still think you need some form of reason to operate on the planet.
Well,
right?
Well, unfortunately, hopefully people get to a point of the intellect where you can rationalize and do all that thing, thinking. But when we go above 500, we go to a comment or a statement I make, thinking won't give it, right? So thinking won't give you anything. Okay. It's one of the things on Teach Energy Medicine, there has to be some kineticism to it. Well, if you think about like all these people, not to name names, that talk about creating your own reality and you can be rich and manifest, and oh my gosh, the answer is no. Why? Because you're using the intellect. You're using some degree of logic or rational reason. Remember, it's an irrational world. How do I know that? Because I haven't won the lottery yet. Logic.
When did you last play?
Logic would dictate that I should have won it by now.
It's my turn.
So when you go above 500, you go into the area of knowingness. And knowingness is without logic, without reason, without information, without anything. It's a state of knowingness. And I teach, if you can know your name, you can know the truth of the universe. Okay?
Yes. And so it's interesting, Randy. Well, let's not diverge. This is level 500, and you can see me smiling because this is like, okay, this is where Roland operates. I love this. This is love, and it's the love absent of anger when you're frustrated. It's this heart-based, unconditional love, where it deals with wholes, unlike logic or reason, right? It's just a whole of something.
Yeah, love transcends the intellect. That's what we were saying about marriage. The intellect at a certain level should have nothing to do with love, right? It gets into, I did a lecture, hopefully I'll be able to recreate it, called God, Sex, and Love. It's a book. And I did the lectures on it at one of the universities and stuff. And it was a real screamer because of, it's called The Conflicts of Desire, right?
Oh,
this is my book.
I thought this was a book by
God, Sex, and Love, The Conflicts of Desire. And I did it years ago, and I just found the videos of it. So I'm trying to get those transcribed and into a book. But the idea that love is something we desire, well, now I have a bias. Now I have a preset idea of what that looks like and everything. And I promise you do not know what love looks like. And there's plenty of songs in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that'll confirm that. So,
rock and roll, country
Yeah,
western,
exactly.
just
And so,
pop music.
so people don't understand rock and roll was our spiritual indoctrination. If you listen to the words, right? And you can
Yeah,
find those
yeah.
same words in the Bhagavad Gita. You can find them in all these spiritual texts, right? And so
Hmm.
I just happen to be heavily indoctrinated with that particular religion. And so anyway, you know, in that series I did, the university I went to wouldn't let me give the talk, but another university in the same state did, which I thought was interesting. And they didn't want any part of it. Yeah. But the one I gave, it had like a couple hundred people at it. And on the love start section, we start with Tina Turner, obviously. What's love got to do with it? And the
Yeah.
answer is, it's not what does love have to do with it. It's like, what does anything else have to do with love, right? If you're in a state of love, pretty much everything else is eliminated. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, once you go past that, then that gets into the spiritual, right? It's a state of mind with no object, is what I call it. So, David talked about love as has an object. I love you. You love me. Well, when you get to an advanced state, is I love you becomes I am being loving, and there's no object to it. And so he explained it like the bird singing is this bird being in love, expressing love. The cat purring, the dog, trying to sit in your lap. All those things is their expression of love. All animals do it, by the way. All birds, everybody, and they do it without rational reason, I'm sure. So, right? Yeah,
See,
yeah.
there we go.
And so,
Yeah.
so they're being the way they are. So to be loving towards a person is to be loving in the way you are. And not all people accept you being loving that way, right? So if
Yeah.
I say I love you, you have the choice of accepting that. We're back to that again, or not accepting it. Okay. And what you're accepting is me being in a loving state. And of course, if we go to love, it's like I love you more than you love me. One of my favorite games. And that's absolutely true, meaning I have more energy for it or something. But again, in a rational reason set, it doesn't have any application, right? The only application comes if I love you at 10, you love me at 1. We call that being a stalker or something, like don't bother or leave me alone.
Yeah.
Right? But think about if you want to be loving, just be loving as the way you feel and act or whatever. And you don't have to do any kind of actions with that. To be in a loving state is to be attractive. This is the part that people really miss in all these attractor and manifesting things. And it's something, again, that your state of consciousness, your level of consciousness is going to attract that which is at that level. It's very rare that somebody at a higher level will reach down and grab hold of you. Okay. So, so again, if you get to a state of lovingness, David said that Einstein only got to 499. And when you look at quantum physics, that transcends 499 Einsteinian physics, right? It actually gets off into an area of knowingness is required. And the other part is that at that level also creation occurs. So, so there's a hint to what all goes on with all these self-help promotions and manifesting reality and all that. They really don't have much of a clue if they're only using rational reason at the intellect. Okay, so
Absolutely. And so many things to say here with the whole manifesting thing. It makes me feel it could be one of those things where when you're trying to promote information that you have, you're going to promote it at the level of conscious and awareness that your customers are. And so you end up coming maybe down to reason. And I use reason in my book as well, right? I talk about, okay, picture this. Yeah, but Randy, you also talked about how animals are being loving, all right, and they don't use logic for it. And it brought about the knowledge from speaking with many folks who have had near-death experiences, who describe that um, when they were out of the physical body and in this whatever realm you want to call it, maybe heaven or not hell, like Randy says, it's not really a place. But they talk about the plants, the animals, everything was alive and singing praises of the one infinite creator in some way. Leslie Lupo is one who describes it very vividly in her book, Every Breath is Precious. Dying taught me how to. And she describes that every blade of grass, every drop of water was alive and singing praise to this same thing that she was made of, which I find very fascinating. And then the last thing I just want to add is, we've spent so much time talking about logic, but to me, there's a huge correlation between acceptance and then this level of love. When you are aware of this level of love, acceptance becomes really very easy because you're dealing with the whole of
Yes,
you,
yes,
who you
yes.
are. So, yeah. So when you get into that state of, I am mad, right? Now you get away from an object, you being the object, getting mad because some other subject caused it to you. Now you talk the language you use, which I like, is I am being mad, and you accept it, and then you can love yourself for being mad, and then you're able to move on, right? And so I like those two levels a lot as far as how they feed on each other, how they look at you as the whole of who you are, not just good vibes only or bad vibes or something like that, right? It just becomes this. Last piece of information to add, 0.4%, according to Dr. David Hawkins, of the world's population is at this level. That's fascinating to me.
Oh,
right?
it is.
Very fascinating.
It's when you walk around and you reach a certain level, you can be aware of everything going on with the person that you see. Right? It's what I teach. Everybody contains their entire history and information. It's an information set, and I can interrogate it, and other people do too, I'm sure. But I can really interrogate it, for specifics. So there's no secrets. Nothing's hidden. Okay, you carry your information, and all the information that exists in an information field, and that's why AI will never be AI, because it can't access the information field. Historically referred to as collective consciousness or whatever. But all thoughts, all information is registered, and all information is available for anything you want to do. And so it's a matter of being able to become in tune with it or aligned with it or all kinds of other rational language, logic, right? But when you were talking about the plants and stuff, is that's what I call a universal vibration, okay? If you go, like I teach, go sit with your back to a tree, you can become aware of the pulse of energy of life through that tree. And I had a lady ask me, like, what are you doing? I said, for 40 years, I've been trying to define life force and define it in a way that allows us to become interactive. And it seems odd to want to pursue that because everything you look at is alive. And so from that standpoint, everything in life has something to teach us. So if you can come to understand that, now you are in pure acceptance, right? And then recognition becomes the logic and the intellect again. And then when you go beyond it, you get into a state of knowingness, and knowingness is a very high level of love and acceptance and willingness and neutrality combined. So there you go. People say, what's the formula? There's a formula right there. So
there you go. Randy, you could just do what everyone else is doing. When you want to define life force, just label it as something else, right? Life force is Prana.
Oh, yeah.
Life force is oxygen.
Okay. So one thing I've been working on is life force. Like, what is it and all? Where does it come from? All these things. I had a lady ask me, like, she goes, well, if I gave you a bunch of money, what would you use it for? And I go, well, it's what I've been using, what I've been studying the last 40 years is trying to figure out what life force is. And we know it's present in ourselves to some degree. We know we lose it. We know plants and rocks and everything has it. Everything exists, has some form of life force to it. And so when I look at all that, I've been researching and I finally figured out where it comes from, what I call in the field. I've actually localized it. And that's kind of like the research I do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm trying to define what it is. And I figure the combination of those two things, because my interest in finding that is being able to heal people. And I mean, that's it. I want to be able to understand it, define it. That's a rational reason thing, to the point that I can utilize it. And I think that's the greatest thing about all the levels of consciousness is they're there for you to utilize. They're not there just to look at, or, oh, wow, look at that. Or I have people all the time call me, or used to, and go, I think I'm at 800. And I was like, well, I don't think so. So
and they're like, well, let's agree to disagree, Randy.
yeah, exactly.
Who are you to tell me what level I'm on?
Yeah. So I tell people, don't be judgmental about yourself, but definitely be observational. And as an observational information set, power versus force and truth versus falsehood are way the heck up there. You can learn a lot by studying this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we thank Dr. Hawkins for being able to come up with it, because he devoted his whole life to coming up with this information. I've devoted mine to trying to figure out life force and what it is, and how we lose it, and how we get sick, and how we get well, and be loving. It's involved in everything we do. So
yeah. Well, my devotion keeps changing, but
yeah,
I mean, it changed a lot after the awakening, and primarily, I really want to help people tap into that same awareness, because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Just remember, like, do you remember who you are? It changes your
exactly.
perspective. And then the second one, I wanted the name Roland to be synonymous with meditating and meditation and meditate. And it's funny, I was thinking about that the other day, because I teach meditation classes to kids, 2 to 5 year olds, at my daughter's daycare every week. And then I also hold hour sessions. Yeah. But the kids at the daycare call me meditation. They don't know my real name. They're like, oh, it's meditation. Go figure that one out, Randy. And so I was thinking the other day, right? You have this thought and this feeling, and then you physically do something where, right, I'm out here talking to kids about meditation. I come in, I use the word, 60 times in an hour when I'm with them. And when they see me even at the grocery store, I ran into one kid the other day with this was a young kid, young boy, with his dad. And he was like, oh, Dad, meditation guy. And I'm like, it's happening. It's happening. Well, Randy, I think this is a good place to stop. Let's stop. I mean, these are really, right, very positive, super positive levels of consciousness that we're talking into. So I think wherever we stop here is great. But yeah, we just talked about unconditional love. And I think it's good to stop here, go meditate on this, and try to make sense of it. Yeah, try to use reason to make sense of unconditional love. But it's always a pleasure. Remind us again about the dates you're going to be in Sedona.
Yes. Originally, we said December 10th, and the venue changed the time, the date. So now October 23rd at about 1 p.m., which is a Sunday in Sedona, Arizona, at the Creative Life Center. I will be presenting a talk speaking on Power versus Force Revisited. And that is to give a 20-year perspective to the book and the teachings of Dr. Hawkins, and also what I've done with it and what I do with it when I give it to my clients and students. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. It'll be great fun. So,
Hey, Will, now that the date has changed, guess
yes.
who is going to be working even harder to attend? I know December will be difficult for me, but
Yeah.
October now, that's
You
it.
know, it
Maybe,
actually worked. Yeah, it worked better. It was, we, after we examined it, remember everybody gets upset first and all that. And I go, no, like, why did you change it? Okay, that's logic. And then, well, how does that work to my advantage, not to my disadvantage? Well, the advantage is it'll be warmer, the weather will be better, it'll be more beautiful, it's a better travel season. It's like positive, 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 positive. And and that's one way that you can utilize all this. You look at your responses to it. What I want to be upset or angry, how does that help? I want to be understanding, acceptance. Okay. From acceptance, can I move to ration and reason and re-examine it and come up with it's a net positive? Woohoo! See you on the 23rd of October. See what I mean?
absolutely.
That's
Bring,
probably
bring
yeah,
that green couch.
yeah. There you go.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
No, guys, again, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation on Dr. David Hawkins's Map of Consciousness. We've stopped at level 500. We got a couple more to go, so one more episode. If you're enjoying these conversations, by all means, leave a comment, ask any questions you want answered, and we'll try to get to them in subsequent shows. And then share it. Share it with a friend,
Yeah.
a family
Exactly.
member who needs to hear this information. Okay, don't be shy about it. That's fine. And Randy, as always, thanks for the jokes, the laughs, and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. This is great fun. It's one of the things that you come across information in your life, and kind of like come across love, and you want to share it. And that's exactly what happened with this information. Same thing with my yoga teachers and martial arts teachers. It's they know things that are beneficial to you, and I'm trying to continue that lineage of disseminating that information. And I think it's beneficial, and I hope that everybody can learn from it and learn from what you've learned and what I've learned. So here we
Absolutely.
go. All right.
Yeah.
All
Until
right.
next time. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Next stop, joyfulness. Okay.
Heck yeah.
540. Okay. Thank you, Roland.
You're welcome.